guys, welcome. Thanks so much for coming. Last day of SAEM. Yeah. Woo, 8 o'clock in the morning. Thanks for showing up, especially with the huge party outside with the Sono games. We appreciate you coming here and being present in this time with us as we talk about taking a look in the mirror and really seeing past imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of us can relate to in our lives within medicine, oftentimes even outside of medicine. And we want to thank ADIEM as well as AWAEM for sponsoring this talk for us. So we have no financial disclosures and just a few of our quick objectives. We'll kind of define what imposter syndrome is and share some different definitions and how it infiltrates the systems that we work in. We'll also talk about, how do you deal with that, especially the lack of doubt, self-confidence, and all the rest. And then really the most major part of this is what are some techniques and strategies that you can actually leave here and actually use for yourself, but especially share with your colleagues, share with your friends, your residents, your students, that you can really make a difference in their lives as well too. Because oftentimes the thing that's holding us back is ourselves. And so how can we break past that and see past that into our true potential? So we're gonna start with our introduction to the panelists, but I wanna pause here and just say, when I was thinking about this talk and thinking about who should I choose for the panelists, the names just came so clear and so easily for me. And it's not only because they're rock stars in med ed, but also how I've been able to kind of see their career trajectories, but also how they brought people with them. So it's not just making a name for themselves, but it's always in that light of how can I bring people, with me and kind of grow their careers, grow their opportunities. And all of these wonderful people on this table have really affected my career, my trajectory, and inside of medicine and also even outside of medicine. So very thankful. So I'll have you guys kind of say your names, your titles, the institutions, maybe areas of passion as well.
Sure, I guess I'm starting because I'm on this side of the table. Good morning, everyone. My name is Arlene Chung. I am the Vice Chair of Academic Affairs at the University of Vermont, where I've been for approximately 5 minutes. Imposter syndrome tends to be quite common during times of change, and so as I confessed during dinner last night, I'm also going through some of my own feelings. So this panel is very timely, and I'm looking forward to hearing from my panelists.
Good morning. I'm Annahieta Kalantari. I'm the Vice Chair of Education at Penn State Health in Hershey, PA. And, it's, I guess, my reason for being here. I've done a lot of really amazing things, and my CV is really impressive, and I'm still kind of wondering, am I really supposed to be here? Did I really do all this stuff? Am I really qualified? So even though, we're up here as the experts kind of giving out advice and dispensing information, I still go through this every day.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Gottlieb. I'm the Vice Chair of Research at Rush in Chicago, and I'll completely echo AK. It's interesting how you go through these fluctuations where you feel really confident and you get the imposter syndrome just kicks in, and whether it's a new activity, a new experience, when you get handled amongst a bunch of other amazing people, how you can kind of vacillate through this, and I think that a lot of us experience that, and so I'm excited to both share some of my experience, but also learn from some of my colleagues as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Adaira Landry. I'm an emergency medicine doc at the Brigham, and I'm an advisor at the medical school and Harvard Medical School, and I focus on helping young early career professionals develop their career, and then I also spend time writing. I like to write.
Hey everyone, L.A. Alvarez. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Stanford, and I run the peer support program for the institution. I just want to just address the gratitude that you just shared with us, because hearing that, I thought you were going to say something like, I picked them so quickly because I know that they fail a lot and they're very comfortable with failure. And so hearing all the things that you said, just thank you. And also echoing what AK said, and if it's okay with you, we're going to be first name basis now, just to kind of level that. To be that expert of feeling like not an expert is an honor to be here.
Awesome. Perfect. So we'll kind of kick off, I think, sharing some of the common definition. Anyone here heard of imposter syndrome, right? All day, every day. And I appreciate this because I think we did in medicine, we didn't actually call it that for the longest time, right? And outside of medicine, they've been talking about this a lot, but just like being aware of it within medicine itself and talking about it and being okay of even having this as conference material has only happened in the last few years itself. And so I think just to start with, there's a couple different definitions for imposter syndrome versus imposter phenomenon is another way of saying it. So do you guys have your own thoughts about like the definitions for this? And Mike, I might have you kick us off if that sounds good.
Guess I'm kicking us off here. So it's interesting, having done quite a bit of work looking in this sphere, there's a lot of variation in terms of you spell it differently, you define it differently, you have imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, imposter-ism, and you start to look through this, and they often derive back the same way that we do with burnout and other things. They say, here's a scale, and here's a dichotomous cut point, and you are either above or below this threshold. And so you have imposter syndrome or you don't. It's almost like it's a binary phenomenon, which I think is kind of an archaic way of doing it. It makes sense for research. If you're trying to quantify something, I get it. You need to be binary so you can split people into two groups, but that's not really how it works. We don't sit there and say, I am either imposter syndrome or I'm not. I think we go through imposterism, degrees of it. There's times when you feel more of it on the kind of extreme imposterism. Times you may feel like less. But I don't think that we should be treating it like an on-off phenomenon, because I think as soon as we label it that way, then you say, well, I don't think I have that. I just don't feel okay. Like, I don't feel like I'm okay in my own shoes. I don't feel confident in my own shoes, but I'm not imposter syndrome. And I think if we allow ourselves the flexibility of saying, I go through gradations of imposterism from more extremes to less extremes, we normalize the fact that we're all going to have some degree of imposterism, and then we can kind of accommodate those degrees instead of just saying, I have or I don't.
Yeah, we could do single mic. I definitely recommend everyone go and read the original paper that was written in 1978 by two psychologists on imposter syndrome. In that article, they detailed sort of the origins of the concept, and I think it's important to share what they found, which was they interviewed a group of mid-career women, mostly white women, who were actually lauded, respected, awarded, promoted, revered by their peers. And these women who were doing well outside were also feeling internally like they were fraudulent, like they weren't really fitting in. And so I think that's a very important distinction, because they were respected by their peers, but they just didn't feel that same level of respect for themselves and being present. And so I think, going back to what I said with my job as an early career advisor, I do find that some people might think they have imposter syndrome because they aren't feeling supported by others. And I just remind them that that's a little bit of an important distinction from the original definition in that original paper.
No, I love that point about like, we need to distinguish if it's us or if it's a lack of support that's causing it. Just like with the like even grit itself, we talk about like, do you need grit or do you actually need support? Right? Maybe it's not a resiliency problem. Maybe it's just that you're being asked to do 20 things, and a normal person can't do 20 things too. So just being thoughtful about that. But the idea of imposter syndrome is a little bit challenging, because you can imagine who it oftentimes gets attributed to. Right, which gender it gets attributed to, where in your career it might get attributed to as well too. So just, I like to always think about this and where it can maybe perpetuate biases as well too. But the idea is like, it's that feeling of not enough, the disease of not enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not just not enough to actually get there, and that's where it gets really tricky.
You're doing great.
I wanted to add one other comment about sort of when you're thinking about the definition of imposterism or imposter syndrome, and do I have it, do I not? I think one of the really interesting things that I can't recall if it was touched on exactly in that article, but there's this idea that you should feel less imposter syndrome as you get more successful in your career, because then the objective evidence is that you're accumulating more things that should reassure you that you in fact do belong where you are. But the interesting thing is that there's a critical piece in that it is difficult for the folks to really internalize those successes, and so it's like this very, like Mike said, you feel these waves of confidence from accomplishing something, but it like slips through your fingers and you feel like you just can't hold on to that feeling.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting also that the word syndrome can be stigmatizing because people will not necessarily associate with it because it sounds like maybe it's a disease, right? There's a lot of syndromes that we know in medicine, and so that's why I think the language has shifted into imposter phenomenon because it's actually just it's a thing that we actually many of us experience. In fact, when Schenefeld and team looked into this, they found that physicians have the highest imposterism compared to any other people in the workforce here in the United States. So that should be somewhat reassuring, that sense of belonging, that we actually all feel this. And if you don't, you're probably feeling it a little bit. You may not just yet understand or are willing to accept the fact that you are feeling this uneasiness, especially during times of transitions. So I think that's very important delineation for me with imposter syndrome versus imposterism versus imposter phenomenon. The challenge, though, is that Clance and Imes, the two psychologists who did this work on imposterism, they use imposter syndrome. So a lot of the literature is on imposter syndrome. And so to switch that to a different name will then kind of like miss some of the, perhaps like when you're combining a bunch of research, like you can't easily do that. And I'm not a researcher here, and I'm very, I will be very quick to answer later on about like my own imposterism with regards to research. Another thing I think that is important to highlight here, I think people have alluded to it, is this idea that when we feel this, again, it's very common, many of us have imposterism. For me, I see it as when I got that nagging feeling, it's like, oh, am I really good enough for this? Yes, it's probably that imposterism. I can call that like, this is me feeling that imposterism. It's also this idea that maybe my body, my own being is telling me something that maybe it's because I don't know how to do statistics, or maybe I don't know how to do this. And so it's actually a good signal. So if we're more attuned to what we're feeling and more attuned to noticing that that imposterism, then maybe I can like sit down more and realize like I need to do X in order to address this imposterism, as opposed to oftentimes what I used to do would be just to hide from it because it's not a good feeling.
May I just ask a question of all of you, not to put all of you on the spot, but I'm just curious. We've gone through various definitions of imposter syndrome, phenomenon, imposterism, and everyone has given a pretty descriptive explanation about what that is and what they have felt. Who here has felt it, like throughout their career? Okay, all right, because that's normal. I just wanted to normalize it, because like everyone up here has felt it, and all of you have felt it, and I think I just wanted to normalize the fact that like we all feel this, and the more successful you are, the more likely you're going to feel it, and the more normal it is. So nobody's an oddball for feeling this way. I mean, you are a successful person, and this is normal.
Awesome. I wanted to talk a little bit about like how imposter syndrome like affects us as EM clinicians or physicians in the ED itself, and then also just in medical education, because I think some of this kind of overlaps we teach in the ED, we teach outside of the classroom as well. So at least starting with at least the clinical realm, have you guys thought about like how imposter syndrome affects like your patient care, the way that you teach on shifts, and then outside the hospital, outside of the classroom as well too?
Yeah, I think one of the impacts for imposterism for me, especially in the clinical arena, is that for a while, especially, so I trained in the Bronx at a county hospital at Jacobi, and then moved to a county hospital in California, and then transitioned to an academic place. And I never considered myself to be an academic person. And so for all of a sudden, when I moved to a place like Stanford, my patient who now like flew in from like I don't know where, expecting me to figure out what's going on with them. Initially, I would try to like make things up, and we're actually very good at this. We rationalize. We're like, well, I think it fits this category of this disease process, and then this, and so like we try to just explain to them, and then they're more confused. And so now, one of my favorite things to say is like, I have no idea what you have. I don't know. I do, and it's my favorite. And then they're like, but this is Stanford. I was like, yeah, I know. But my expertise is to make sure, like, to when you go home, or if you go home, like, to let you know that you don't have a heart attack, you don't have a stroke. And so for me, it gives me now the courage and freedom to say, like, I don't know. Because I also tell them, like, that is really not the expertise of emergency medicine. Like, you don't go to a sushi place and order pizza. It's just not a thing, right? And so, like, if you want good sushi, like, we're very good at that here. But if you want a pizza place, go to your primary care doctor. Or, I'm not saying that they're pizza people, but I'm just saying, like, that is their area of expertise. So, like, figure out, like, what you have. Like, my job is to figure out what you don't have. And so that is, like, a clear delineation for me, and I've accepted that. And again, I can't tell you how many times on a given shift I say I don't know, and how many times I say that in front of my residents and med students to let them know that I don't have to know everything in order to take care of my patients. But they will also see me when I resuscitate to be this calm, collected person who's actually freaking out inside, trying to figure out what's happening. And then in the end, we'll also debrief and say, like, I was really nervous about this, or I had no idea about this one angle.
Yeah, I share a similar transition in terms of where I started and where I am now with work. I trained and worked in a community hospital that had a residency program for several years. And then I was like, you know, I really feel like I need to go to an academic institution because I need more mentoring, I need more resources, like I want to grow professionally. And I kind of met the height of what I was going to do with my career there. So I went to Penn State Health, and people who don't know, this is a quaternary referral center in the center of Pennsylvania, and the catchment area is huge, like huge. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, I'm going to go work at this place, and you know, I don't remember the last time I even read about an LVAD. What if an LVAD patient comes in? There's a big Amish population there, and when I first started, you were responsible for covering some of the pediatric emergency department, and I was like, oh my God, there is going to be like some kid coming in with like a ductal dependent lesion, and I'm going to put them on oxygen and kill them. And I haven't done this, and I was like reading up on prostaglandin doses the night before because I was just freaking out. And then I thought, oh my gosh, these residents, like, they're going to be smarter than me. What if they're smarter than me? That wasn't the case. But, but all these questions that you kind of go through, and you're like, I don't know this, I don't know that. And, you know, it's, I played rugby in college, and I would get really nervous before every rugby game, like really nervous, to the point where sometimes I would vomit. Like, I couldn't even put my mouth guard in because I would gag on it and puke. And I was a wreck until it was the first point of contact. Whether I got hit, or I tackled someone else, or I was in a ruck, which you can Google that, then I finally calmed down. And so for me, a lot of this imposter syndrome is like, what do I do to myself ahead of time? Like, I go through and I play all these different scenarios in my head of like, what if this, what if that? But then once I get to that first point of contact, right? So the first day of work, the first time I'm teaching the residents, then I'm able to kind of go into a groove. And so now what I do is I always say, like, I just need the first hit, which could sound terrible if you take it out of context. But that's really what it is. It's that first point of contact. And so now I know that imposter syndrome is normal. I know that this narrative that I'm putting like through my head is normal. And now I'm able to kind of talk myself down and say, like, listen, you're going to be fine. Like, all these things that you're feeling are normal. As soon as you get in there and you like take that first point of contact, everything's going to be great. You're going to teach fine. You're going to take care of patients fine. There are going to be times where you don't know what's going on, and that's okay. You don't always have to know where's going on. And so my mantra and kind of self-talk is a lot different now than before. And now when I feel like the spiral, because sometimes, like, I just have anxiety. I'm like this type A, anxious nervous Nelly type. I just breathe to help me get through it. And I think the biggest thing is when you get in those situations, you don't want this imposterism to impede you from succeeding, right? That's where it's a problem. Imposter syndrome is normal, but when it interferes with your own success because you're allowing it to, that's where the problem arises. So that's kind of how I've dealt with it in the clinical setting and in the teaching setting.
So I'll kind of build on that as well. When I was a resident, I thought every attending knew everything. Right? There was that mentality, especially when you're like an early resident, you look around and you're like, how do they know everything and I don't know anything? Yeah. So my approach to every patient was, I'm gonna pretend I know everything. And I'm gonna be very, very confident in my decisions. And internally I was like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm totally winging this, but if I sound confident enough, some of the attendings when they're distracted, you'll be like, good job. And at the end of the day, the feedback was like, hey, good job. And I think I spent probably my first year not getting any meaningful, substantive feedback because I was so focused on trying to portray this external vision of myself as, knowing everything and being very, very confident when in reality I was like, I don't know anything. I'm a first year resident. What am I gonna know? And as a new attending, I emulated what I saw as a resident. I was like, oh, I need to, as attending, show that I know everything now and be able to give them the answers. Like teach, be very approachable, but be very confident and be like, yes, no, this is the answer to this. This is the answer to this. Here's the paper, this is the answer. And what I found is that the dynamic that came out of that one, even though it was a good shift, it was kind of an artificial dynamic. They would say something, I would give them the evidence, and they'd be like, okay. And then we would move on. And I felt like as I started to get more comfortable being attending over my first couple of years, I transitioned to normalizing at the start of the shift saying, medicine's vast. I'm gonna give you the best information I can right now. I don't know everything. You're gonna know things I don't know. That's why we're a team. And I started to normalize us being a team where we bring different pieces of information to it, and the dynamic of that shift markedly changed. All of a sudden, they were more vulnerable, more comfortable saying, I don't know this, and then we'll figure it out together. Their receptivity to feedback. You know how you sometimes in shift, you'll like say something and then you're like, the learner you're with, you're like, they're not getting it, they're not receptive to it, they're just trying to, placate me to move on to the next page. Like, okay, sure, whatever you want to get, no, you don't need to do that. But to actually have that normal conversation, we can talk through the evidence and have that healthy conversation, I think we have to allow ourselves the vulnerability saying, we don't know everything. And that's okay. No one does. No one does. And so I started to normalize that in my shift, and I felt like that really changed that dynamic for them and for me. It made it a much more enjoyable, well, I love what I do anyways, but it made an extra enjoyable shift for me because I was able to kind of learn new things from the shift and set that expectation that, yeah, you know what? You're gonna show me something I didn't know, and now I'm gonna walk away this shift also now knowing something I didn't know earlier, so I get to be a better doctor at the end of the shift too.
I'm gonna actually have Ellie talk on the next one too, as well too, but go ahead, Ellie, and then I'm gonna ask you this question afterwards.
I will answer this. I will follow up this point only to highlight that that was a great example of you can be an expert and be a work in progress at the same time, right? Because probably every paper that I will pick about medicine, including clinical medicine, like Gottlieb's name is there. And so if he says that, like, I don't know, I'm like, I really don't know what I'm doing here.
Exactly.
And also to acknowledge this feeling. So we talked about like our own imposterism, the inward thing that we do, working with learners, and also understanding, developing that empathy that maybe our learners are also dealing with this because they are, and creating that space. And also I think the other category, and also we talked about patients, but also there's that category of our consultants. I don't know about you, but when I first started at the mothership, I still remember this case because I had this patient, like, I don't know, they broke their elbow or something, and then I called orthopedics because that's what we would do, and the ortho resident was like, well, can you describe the fracture? And then all of a sudden it just brought back like medical school memories. I'm like, is this angulated? Is this displaced? Like what thing? And then I was nervous on the phone, and I'm like, I don't know, it's broken. Like, I don't, do you want me to send you a picture? Because it's really broken, right? And then I was like, I'm going to get fired because like that is not a Stanford way of responding to consultants. But what I learned over the years is that they also don't know. They're also learning, right? And yet, somehow, we have these like response mechanisms. Some people will puff up. They're like, it is angulated display. I'm like, that's great because you memorize and you know that, but if I don't understand that either, because sometimes my residents would present it that way. I didn't know that they're Googling how to present it to me, and then I'm like, and I tell them actually to this day, like especially the medical students are really, really good. I'll be like, I'm a very simple emergency medicine doctor. Like, I don't need to know the physiology, but I will tell you, here's what we're gonna do next.
Yeah.
All right, so
Yeah.
with that,
And just to kind of tie that together is just, we'll see, it's important for us just with who we're working with, just to, especially our learners, to think about that they're coming into that space, you know, the new territory with this imposter syndrome, and it might manifest in a lot of ways of overconfidence or underconfidence. I know when I started at Duke, I was just like, oh no, these Duke residents are really smart. And I would even walk to the other pods and be like, talking to my fellow attendings, I was like, I'm gonna staff this patient with you, because I answered something, my residents answered very confidently, it sounded so wrong that it's making me question my own medical knowledge when I was like, that doesn't seem right. And they're like, Sree, you got it. Trust yourself. You know what you're doing. But I was like, but they answered it so confidently. So just know it can show up as overconfidence or underconfidence. But some of that may actually stem from this imposter syndrome of just wanting to be enough in that space itself. And then anyone in the room ever say, like, I'm not a researcher?
oh yeah, that's totally me.
Right? That is kind of what we're thinking about a lot. It's like, we say that a lot to ourselves.
Our head except for Gottlieb.
Yeah, exactly. So this is especially, I think, at places like SAEM, right, where we're surrounded by all these projects and all these things. Sometimes we should be inspired, but we actually leave here feeling not enough, right? We feel like there's so much more we should be doing and stuff too. So how have you guys kind of felt with medical education and research and scholarship?
Again, this resonates a lot with me because I've written with every single one of you here, and every single time you probably heard me say something, a version of, I'm not really a researcher, like, let me know what I can do. To now, I've just accepted that, like, I will not understand the statistics. And so, like, there was this one paper that we published on the racial bias with the ESLO. And I remember this to this day because I God bless his soul. So Gottlieb and Lysimanics would be like, hey, how's it going with that paper? I was like, oh, it's going. But then I was like freaking out because I did not understand the math. And so at one point, Lexi was like, do you want to just talk? And it did. We had a very candid conversation, Gottlieb and Lexi and I said, I'm very nervous about this because we found these really important findings about the biases that happen with the ESLO, but I don't know the math, and I need somebody to double check, triple check, and make sure that this is going to be accurate, because otherwise when we present this, people are going to rip us apart. And so what I've learned from that experience, and I remind myself this, is that, again, oftentimes when I'm uncomfortable, it's because there is something there that I really truly believe, and maybe I just don't have the skills yet, and maybe I want to invest in it and learn more statistics. I don't. Or maybe there's just other experts out there. And so we did. So we met with our statistician. That's all I needed to do. I needed to just sit down with our stats PhD to like remind me and reassure me that like, yeah, I reran this and it's the same data, and like whatever you're going to present is accurate.
I believe and I don't want to miss a tribute, but I think it was AK that mentioned earlier about one of the sort of more troubling things about imposter phenomenon is its ability to limit setting in terms of what your goals might be and what you sort of aspire to achieve in your career. And I think that manifests in the clinical environment, but I think pretty dramatically in the academic environment. Again, you know, you come to a place like SAEM, you're like, wow, look at all these amazing people doing these amazing things. I could never do that. And so I think in the research too, it bears out whenever there are particularly leadership opportunities in which you will be sort of exposed and vulnerable in that position. People who score higher on these scales of imposter phenomenon tend not to actually apply for those positions. We see it not just in leadership positions, but also going up for promotion, sort of speaking opportunities, anything in which there could be a possibility of failure and this idea that I might be unmasked as not actually belonging here. That's when it tends to show up, and I think in some ways that, in my role as the Vice Chair of Academic Affairs, my job is really to help promote our faculty. I think that's actually in some ways where, at least in the academic sphere, we can make a lot of difference, and I think even just voicing a lot of this, normalizing a lot of this, and having people recognize that feeling that you're feeling does not mean that you're not actually qualified to have that position. That's just a very normal feeling that all of us have.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of want to move us to overcoming imposter syndrome. So you see how it kind of can infiltrate our clinical lives and our education lives, and also the scholarship. But we're not even talking about outside the hospital, right? All the goals and hobbies and families that we have and dreams we have outside the hospital as well. So it can really kind of hinder our potential of what we believe we can actually achieve. So how have you guys kind of overcoming your own like personal lives and professional lives, imposter syndrome. And Adaira, I'll probably have you kick us off. That sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle to accept that I formally have imposter syndrome just because I feel like there have been so many external factors that have told me I don't belong, that I feel like I'm focused more on that, like just trying to navigate a system that wasn't really built for me to succeed, that has been the priority of my journey. And like, I listen to all these stories and I'm like, oh wow, it feels like imposter syndrome is almost like a privilege, like to be able to just focus on your own self-doubt and not the self-doubt of others. Because I think that's really where I am in the academic world, is people really do doubt me. And really just trying to prove that has always been my priority, whether it's in high school when I got accepted to Berkeley and someone said, of course they'll accept you, you're black, versus the patient when I walk into the room and they say, I've never seen a black doctor before, is there someone else you're working with? Like throughout this entire journey, there are these like external moments where you're so clearly doubted that to listen to some of you guys, I'm thinking, wow, that's actually, that would be my only struggle. And I'm not minimizing anyone's experience here, but then that would be just so unique for me. But I think one thing is I just focus on my strengths. I think, I'm not a researcher either, but I'm not ashamed to say that. Like, I'm also not a ballerina, right? And so there are many things that I'm not, but there are many things that I am, and I'm like very happy about that. And just accepting that I cannot be everything and do everything all at once has been probably the biggest priority for myself when it comes to just like maintaining this position within academia, these hyper-competitive, rat racy type of places where you're just like always going. I say, I can't do that because I don't know how, and also I don't want to learn that. That has helped me.
I mean, I think to your point, and now we're moving into sort of solutions, I think this idea, one, recognizing sort of the ubiquity of all of the feelings that exist out here, really bringing other people up and recognizing when other folks may be struggling, or when you can actually provide that external source of, like, you belong, I will help you along your journey. I think particularly for the folks here who are in more senior leadership positions, I think that can be really key for other people in your department and other people that you're working with.
I think one of the biggest gifts of my career thus far has been reaching a point in my career where I can be useful to others and help bring others up. I remember in the beginning of my career, I was kind of like, I'm like a leech. I'm just sitting here sucking the life out of all of these people who know what they're doing and I don't know what I'm doing. And now I've reached a point where I just kind of hear like little mutterings of people speaking and I'm like, oh wait, no, I can help you with that. And I think having that privilege has been really great. And then being able to kind of, again, take a step back and say like, no, I do belong here, because although not a black woman, I am an agentic female in a specialty that does not embrace me in any way. And so I have also been told things like, I'm broken and not fixable, there's something wrong with me, I'm never gonna be successful. Like literally, I've had people say these exact words to me. And to not only have found success, but then be able to coach and mentor others kind of through it has probably been one of like the biggest gifts in my own evolution of overcoming imposter syndrome.
I think for me, and Sree and my friends here have heard me talk a lot about self-compassion. I mentioned earlier the statistics about imposterism being very common among physicians in the US. Physicians also have historically the lowest self-compassion. And so just a quick primer on that. Kristen Neff has done a lot of work on self-compassion, and there's three parts of that for that to truly to work. The first one, I think, so I'm reshuffling this because I think this is how it makes sense to me. The first one is just to be aware, so that self-awareness or what you would call mindfulness. Self-awareness of like, oh yeah, I feel like I don't belong here. I feel like I'm not good enough for this. I feel like maybe I don't have the right skill set for this. And that is very different from over-identifying to I am a failure, I am not a researcher, I am not this. The second part is really this idea of common humanity, which is every single one here earlier, well, if you came in late, that's okay too, but like raise your hand that you're feeling this imposterism, right? So just knowing that you're actually not alone in this is very, very important. That's the second part. And so the third part is then you incorporate this idea of self-kindness. We just have to be kind to ourselves. Accept the fact that like, hey, I can be an expert on this, and yet I'm also this. Or I'm not a ballerina, but like I'm a book author. Like, so all of these things there's a lot of truths and there's a lot of perceived truths. And being kind with ourselves, I think, is going to be very helpful. I really like the phrase of I can and still, because it allows me to have dualities or dichotomies instead of like simply being one or the other. And then by applying that idea of self-compassion, when we've heard as medical educators, we've heard a lot about like growth mindset, but I really didn't understand that until I've learned more about self-compassion. You cannot be in the growth mindset if you're not kind to yourself. And so for me, a simple way to add the growth mindset is to just adding yet. I'm not a researcher yet. I'm not a statistician yet. And maybe that yet I will never reach that, and that's okay, right? But then I am making a decision for myself, knowing what I'm accepting about me at this current moment, and what I'm willing to then expand and grow for, because as people are saying here, we can't do everything. I will also say that like, right now I may feel like I'm very comfortable talking to everybody here, but my very first talk was actually, we were just reflecting on this, was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago only. Like I've been attending for like almost 14 years. And so my CV for like academic scholarship really just started about like 5 years ago. And I remember my very first talk was being connected to AK, Arlene, and Nicole Battaglioli. And I was freaking out. I was literally like super nervous. I showed up to the talk, like I would send them emails, like multiple emails, like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do. I have notes. I would like memorize the thing that I would talk about. And then I'm like, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna be fine. Until last night, we were having dinner, and then we all recognized, actually, we didn't know that we're all on the same panel today, because now it's just like, all right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Right, sorry, Sree.
No worries, I got you.
I mean, LA and I knew that we were on this.
We just didn't know that, Arlene. But I think my point of sharing this and kind of like joking around about it is that I've also learned to surround myself with people who are very comfortable with this feeling of like, maybe I don't have all the right skill set. And so my very first, so I have a lot of very firsts here actually. My very first article in like a newspaper was with Adaira Landry. And a lot of these work has been like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then people are like, no, I think we can do this. I'm like, so then like, I'm an activator, which got me in a lot of trouble earlier on in my career, but now I'm like, I embrace that. I get people excited about the most simplest things. And so I just know that about myself. And instead of moving away from that, I just lean into like the ones that I'm good at, and the ones that I'm not good at this stage, I'm like, yeah, I'm not good at that. Like somebody else.
And so we've been talking a lot about internal processes for addressing this, but remember at the beginning when AK asked how many people have experienced this? We all experience this. So when you look around, that means everyone else around you is also experiencing this. And so I think we equally need to reflect on the outside piece of it, and the fact that everyone around us is either actively or has recently likely experienced some degree of imposter syndrome, and how do we help to try to support them as well? Because think about the last time you got feedback, right? Do you remember the positive or the negative part? A week later, do you remember the positive or the negative part?
Negative always.
When you say the word feedback and you tell someone you're going to give them feedback, are they like, ooh, I can't wait to hear some really positive things about how awesome I am? No, they hear something nearly, they're like, oh no. You could tell the anxiety, you could see them like feel uncomfortable, because even if something positive is in there, they're waiting for the negative. We often tend to get the positive and we're like, oh yeah, you did a really nice job there. And let me tell you all the negative things very discreetly and concretely and extensively. And and we don't spend the time on the positive. We gloss over it. We don't give concrete, actual, authentic, positive experiences like, Ellie, you did a phenomenal job really bringing our team together, and you are an activator. You are someone that brings our team and brings enthusiasm, and when everyone's kind of like getting tired on the project, you reinvigorate everyone. Authentic, meaningful, true, and these are true feedback, but yes, authentic, meaningful feedback that actually reflects on them, so you're like, oh yeah, I am good at this. And if we do that, we need to do it again and again. It does take serial rounds because we do remember the negatives. Maybe that's as human beings, maybe particularly as physicians, but that's a really common thing is we focus on these negatives and we don't spend a adequate amount of time actually giving true, meaningful, positive feedback to tell how awesome someone is. And there's a commoner question back there.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, a lot of that feedback you're talking about is constructive and people internalize it, but what do you do with, like what Indira was saying, or AK, sorry, I don't know you, but the sense when people say, you're not good enough because you're a woman or you're black or whatever it is, you get that feedback. And so even if internally you've been able to say, or you've been able to help your residents say, like, yes, you have the ability to do this, and yet they get this external world telling them you don't get paid as much because you are whatever. You don't get, your boss doesn't take you as seriously because you're, whatever category you're in. How do you help people overcome that?
I think part of it is, first you have to let them feel the feels. Because when you, and to this day, even in my career, like about a month and a half ago, I got hit with just huge professional disappointment. And it was really hard for me. And I'm still kind of like working through the feelings. And so I think one of the first things that you need to do is tell someone they really have to feel the feels and allow them that space. That's really important. The next thing is, once they're at a place where they can, to go back and look at those comments and really just pause for a second and reflect on them and see, could there be any degree of useful information that I can get out of whatever this is that I just heard, right? So I'll tell you, there's some person in my group who doesn't like me. I think I know who it is, but whatever. And we do anonymous feedback on faculty, and one of the feedbacks was, I commute an hour and a half to work. And the feedback was, she needs to either quit here or move closer because the fact that she needs to make switches for family things is not my problem. And so, I looked at that and I paused here and I'm like, okay, that is a ridiculous comment. Like, that's someone just being hurtful under the veil of anonymity.
Yeah.
Did I say that word right? And so, but it did make me think, when I am sending out like swap requests, maybe like the way that I write the emails, I can change. Or maybe I just find one or two people and text with them directly and things like that. So I think even in the ridiculousness of what you're hearing, there might be a little bit of room to kind of take some of that. Now, some of it, you do have to be able to kind of filter as well. Like you're broken and not fixable. I mean, that was just someone being an a-hole, right? And so I felt the feels. And then when I had the ability to just kind of pause and try and process that a little bit, I was able to kind of look at it and be like, this is no degree of useful feedback for me at all. This was someone just trying to be hurtful. And once I'm able to kind of label that and identify that, it's a little bit easier to move on. And then the other part is finding kind of camaraderie, right? Like knowing that other people with my same personality, with some of my same kind of characteristics, also share some of these lived experiences with me. And being able to kind of have that support to turn to also kind of helps me with those things. It's not a fast process. So if the goal was like for me to give you this really like chunky, quick nugget of info, I don't think being on the receiving end of things like that is like a quick nugget thing. You kind of need the space, you need the time, and you need the resources to process that. I think we all kind of need to be able to process some of these things. And then there may be other people who are just like, they're crazy, I'm great, and they're able to move on, right? But for the ones that can't, I think you need to give them the time, the space, and the resources to work through it.
Yeah.
I don't know, Adaira, if you have anything to say.
And yeah, it's really important just to think like imposter syndrome, but the labels that are placed on people are also placed on different members of our community, our underrepresented in medicine, our women in medicine may get some of these labels that they're actually not attributing to themselves as imposter syndrome, but the world is placing on them to limit their potential as well too. So just being very thoughtful about that. And then also the systems that we work in as well too, right? The glass ceilings, the sticky floors that we talk about, the broken ladders to promotion, right? Those are things that are actually outside of us that can oftentimes impede where we're trying to go. And so it's just important to just be very thoughtful about, imposter syndrome as something maybe within us, but there's also all these other factors outside of us that can really make it very challenging to reach that. And just my approach to like those type of comments that pop up, I'm a FMG, so you can imagine what that was like kind of in my medical journey, and I was also a nurse too, so you can imagine what that was like, going through the ways too of not belonging as well too. And I think the best advice I got is like, take with me the people who matter. That's the advice that I'll take with me and help form my identity and who I am. Everyone else who's talking, I don't need to listen to that because their words are just words, and they don't actually need to be, incorporated in my identity of how I, define myself. And yes, maybe I'll go home and cry to my trusted friends and then get over it, right? But at least I don't have to walk with that for the rest of my journey in medicine as well. So it's hard to do, and that's why you want to have a trusted group of friends that you can go and talk to about this as well.
I definitely agree with everything both of you said. And caution the labeling of someone else as having imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon or imposterism. I mean, I think we definitely, I have definitely seen students, early career professionals, mid-career professionals tell me that they have been told they have it, and when you really probe into what the actual problem is, it's just that they are truly unsupported, and they have asked many times for support or advocated for themselves and have felt more so a sense of abandonment or loneliness or isolation from their institution or from their group, and it has nothing to do with their own belief in who they are as an individual or as a professional. So it's, it's a loaded word, it's a loaded term, a loaded diagnosis, and I think it really depends on the individual and their circumstance, and it really probably shouldn't be something that's like externally applied to someone without really understanding like the deep meaning behind it and what they're going through.
I love this conversation, and I think I'll add that the field of fields, Oprah has a book recently with Mark C. Brooks, and they added the phrase afterwards, feel the field and take the wheel. I think it's important for us to understand what's within and the beyonds of our control. So like the withins of my control is whenever I feel this, and there are those like inherent environmental factors that prevent me from being seen from by other people, or there's like leaders that think like, I don't know why you're doing this, you didn't do a med ed fellowship, or whatever that language is, those stories. I don't need their validation, right? Because I cultivate this practice of self-compassion, and part of that is, again, finding communities. And so I will text my wellness unicorn friends, I will text like people, I will call them, I talk to them, because then they can remind me, because it's very common when I feel this, that like, I'm really in the rut, I'm feeling the feels, and also it helps to get perspective, right? It doesn't take away all those like real, like awful structural things that prevent me from like moving to the next step, but it does remind me that I have inherent values as well. I have inherent like skills and strengths that I can leverage myself in and work with that. Well,
we're right at time. We're going to leave our Our email address is up here as well too, but I hope that you're leaving here knowing that, imposter syndrome is something that's normalized. That's something kind of we all feel, but that there's power in surrounding yourselves with people that in your lowest points, they can remind you of your worth and your value and all the qualities that you have. And then also the same ways when they're in their lowest times, you can remind them and help lift them back into the light of their potential and their true talent and skills as well too. And so that the next time that you look in the mirror and you see that imposter syndrome, you can say to yourself that you're enough and all that you have to offer is more than enough. So thank you so much.
And really celebrate those wins. We're not as good with celebrating the wins. Imposterism oftentimes is like focus on the negative part. The wins are actually much more important, but yet we focus on the negative because we're in survival mode. But once we start seeing all those positive things and actually like celebrating the wins, like and there's science behind this, like the 3-to-1 ratio by Barbara Fredrickson, like the more we think and recognize the positive things that we're doing, the more you start to see, oh yeah, and I did this and I did this. And so for me, like practically, so one thing that might be useful for you, I send myself a letter. I have no financial disclosures here, but Dear Future Me is a free online thing. I write myself a letter every 6 months. I highlight all the things that I've done that I can think of, and I write the things that I'm like struggling with, the things that I'm like losing sleep over. And then in 6 months, it gets sent to me. And invariably, every single 6 months that I've been doing this for several years, the thing that I'm like stressing about, I'm like, I don't understand why I'm stressing about this. And also, it's a good reminder. I was like, oh yeah, I did that, and I did this, and I did this. And also, it's helpful for your CV at the end of the year because now you just outlined it.